In this clip, I want to talk about another market failure, namely what we call public goods. So what are we saying here? Well, quite simply, that the market system fails to produce an adequate level of what we identify as being goods and services necessary for the basic operation of society, the functioning of society. So we only have to go back to ancient civilizations to recognise that even they acknowledge the need for the development of infrastructure such as roads and dams and aqueducts, etc., and that society was asked to make a common contribution. So we go back to the idea of collecting taxes, so a small amount relatively from each individual goes into a big pot we call public sector revenue, and then we trust our governments to apportion that money through to the acquisition of public goods and services that the private system will not provide. So we simply ask ourselves why does the market system fail to produce an adequate level of what we call public goods? When you go and buy a pair of jeans or a pizza, for example, that's yours. So you've paid the price and there's an exclusion principle. Everyone else is excluded from the participating in that consumption except you. In public goods, the exclusion principle is not applicable. So there's a non-exclusion aspect of this, and part of the problem, for example, we can have a look, for example, at what we might call the free rider problem associated with the provision of, for example, the classic public good that I was taught about when I was a student. Imagine a lighthouse. Would you, as an entrepreneur, direct your land, labour, capital, etc., to the provision of a lighthouse? Well, the answer probably is no, because once you turn the light on for every ship to see where the dangerous rocks are, then all the other ships that are also sailing along the coast, they get a free ride. So it's not possible to charge for this. So if you can't charge, then you're clearly not going to make any profit. So this is not an attractive proposition. But everyone acknowledges that that's a really, really vital thing. The indivisible nature of public goods also simply means that we can't break up some of the public goods and services into such small amounts that individuals can be catered for. For example, our defence forces, our air, our army and navy, etc., etc. And of course then there's the provision of law and order and public safety, the police force, for example. So you can't access, as a private individual, these small units of these goods and services. So we identify that they are indivisible and that the exclusion principle cannot prevail. So what's the answer? Well, the answer, as I suggested earlier, is for governments to devote resources, some of their resources, which they need to derive from the private sector, and they'll take away those resources from the private sector by imposing taxes either on businesses or individuals. Now, collectively, a pot of public sector funding, and then of course you can actually understand where there's a potential political conflict between you and what the government's doing. So the provision of education and health, for example, which are technically what we call quasi-public goods, because there is some provision from the private sector in those instances. But in terms of what we would call, say, pure public goods, think of the defence forces and, for example, the police force, etc. So again, a role for government to play to fill what we identify as a failure of the market system to provide an adequate level of.